Welcome to Hudson RPO's podcast on racial equality and diversity. Hear from Hudson RPO leaders as they encourage organizations to just start on their D&I journey.
Hello and welcome back to Just Start. Joining me today, as always, are my colleagues Casey and Gary, and also as our special guest star today, Kitty Moore from within the extended Hudson family. Kitty, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to dive straight in and bring up something that we were talking about earlier. So, as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion on this podcast every week, oh my goodness, look who's visiting. Yeah, you can't script these things. So as we talk about that on the podcast, you get into a habit of just saying those words on repeat or saying DE&I and not always really like interrogating what are we actually talking about here. And Kitty in a previous conversation mentioned a term that I really thought about in terms of like inclusion, which is this nice sort of warm fuzzy term. But she really, you, Kitty, mentioned freedom as being your experience of working within an inclusive environment. And I was wondering if you might just expound on that a little bit for us.
Absolutely. And thank you for inviting me to join you today. In speaking about inclusion, one of the things that I found such joy in working with Hudson is the ability to bring all of my skill sets to the table, the ability to use them and then gain more and be inspired to learn more, which I equate to freedom because in my past experiences with other organizations, they said inclusion, but they didn't do inclusion. And I was not able to I was not a valued part of the team. I was just kind of like a wheel in the cog, a cog in the wheel. And none of my ideas, none of the things none of the skill sets that I knew would make a difference were used. They were always smashed down by a previous director. And it was a very intimidating and abusive type of relationship. And it was based on my skin color. I found that out because it was straight out said. It was because I was Black. And it made for a very hard working environment for me. And so the joy is when I come to Hudson, we are diverse. The teams are diverse, which is surprising and exciting. And the leadership, I believe, if this makes sense to everybody, is transformational. So everybody has a set of leadership skills. And I find the leadership that I've worked with to be transformational leaders, which means they are open to ideas. They are open and freely give the resources made available so that you actually get a chance to be the best that you can be. And that's freedom for me because I love learning and I love putting that learning to good use. And I'm able to do that with open reins. It's wide and free for me to be the best that I can be. And that's through the transitional leadership.
So, Kitty, you were generous enough to share with us, before we talk about what good looks like, let's take just a little bit to talk about what maybe not so good looks like. And you were generous enough to share with us a story recently about a potluck that you experienced within another working environment that was sort of meant to be at least like lip service towards building an inclusionary environment. And I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about that, what it stemmed from, what it looked like, and how you felt having experienced that event.
Absolutely. Going into office every month in this previous organization, there was a potluck for the office. So we sat in what was called a bullpen. So there were like maybe 40 people, 45 people in this bullpen. And so every month there was a potluck, a general potluck, but everybody had to sign up. There was a sign up list a sheet to bring certain things like meatballs, rolls, napkins, cups. So when it was and the list, they would just sign off on the list. But when it was Black History Month, they said that we could have a cultural potluck. And whatever we wanted to bring to share. And there weren't very many of us, so we actually invited another team from the fifth floor to come and participate in that, to celebrate that. And we planned and had this potluck. We had dirty rice, we had potato salad, we had we had fried ribs. It was just wonderful, beautiful. We had collard greens, black eyed peas. We had homemade cornbread, sweet potato pie, butter cake,
You're
pound
making
cake.
us hungry.
It was a wonderful feast, and everyone that was not Black in my office, they left and went to O'Malley's Pub for lunch.
Mm.
So they did not participate in the cultural potluck. And then one of the remarks was made that our food stinks.
Mm.
So it was very devastating, and it was super hurtful, and everyone was kind of like numb. It took the joy out of the potluck, honestly. You know, people didn't want to, they wanted to, instead of to get your food and sit down and talk, they wanted to get their food and then go back to and eat at their desk.
Mm.
And so there was a huge difference between the potluck, the monthly potluck, and the potluck they decided to give to us.
Mm.
It was a very large impact because none of leadership spoke to that at all.
I think Jeremiah made a point, you know, and when we had our pre-discussion, which everyone that watches our podcast regularly knows, we always, you know, do a bit of a pre-discussion, but Jeremiah did make a point that, you know, if it's just the potluck, there needs to be more to it. You need to kind of educate people as to, you know, what is the purpose, so that it's not just a check a box type, you know, check the box, we celebrated Black History Month or whatever it may be. But there definitely needs to be more direction and understanding of what the benefit and the purpose is of that type of event.
Right.
Yeah, look, and as we're, you know, as we call this thing Just Start, right? It's because we want people to start taking some action, but the right actions, right? So, you know, it's not about recognizing a holiday or recognizing an event within an environment that isn't set up to make everyone feel included. Because how do you recognize and celebrate somebody when people don't have the capability or haven't been brought along the journey of celebrating?
Mm-hmm.
So you put, the risk is exactly what unfortunately, Kitty, you experienced, which I'm so sorry that was your experience. But I feel like this is the trap that a lot of companies fall into in putting activity ahead of action. Gary, I think you had a comment you were about to make.
Yeah, no, and we discussed it last week, you know, on last week's podcast, and it is one heck of a point in the sense that I think that the intent was supposed to be positive. The intent was supposed to be good, but there was no plan, and you don't have any response from the folks that it will impact eventually, right? So, and I know that some companies struggle with what do we do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, have a survey, you know, get feedback from your folks about different things, you know, talk to professionals about what they've done or other companies, colleagues, and what they've done. But to your point, Jeremiah, we did talk about this before, and it rang true, is that potluck was put together with no plan. There was no communication around anything, and it happened to send the wrong message when the intent was to send the right message.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no plan around that. And so it's a great, you know, experience to share. Thank you, Kitty. I appreciate that. I know it was hurtful, but it's a great experience to share so that others don't fall into that trap. Better planning, better cohesiveness, and better response from the folks that it impacts is going to hopefully change that experience.
And just one last thing to tie back to your story, Kitty, and then maybe a question for you. So as Gary was just saying, like, they missed, well, it's very clear that they missed the mark, right? So, but then it wasn't just that they missed the mark, it was then just the complete absence of acknowledgement of that fact, right? So it was a bit of a, they made an effort. I think we're all in agreement it wasn't the right effort or enough of an effort, but clearly, possibly predictably, it fell apart. And there just wasn't an acknowledgement of that. So just wondering your thoughts about, knowing that this is a challenging space, and sometimes people misstep or are still learning and do or say things that do cause real harm and or real hurt. And what is your what do you think when that's not acknowledged? How does that affect your experience, if either just broadly or in relation to anything that you've have experienced previously?
Well, I find it interesting because they set that up for Black History Month and they called it a cultural potluck. So my expectation of that potluck was I was supposed to see goulash, I was supposed to see German schnitzel, I was supposed to see not just food of my culture, but food of all of the cultures represented in our workspace, because all of us come from somewhere. And
Yeah.
so when that did not happen, you become paralyzed. You become actually you actually become a little bit shut off, because there's a lack of respect for, and there's an element of insult, because you expect me to participate in your potluck that we have every month, the general. But then you don't participate in the one that specifically recognizes or celebrates the culture of all of us in the office. And then when leadership does not address that, because the potluck is not a mandatory event, it kind of says to you, why am I here?
Mm.
Why am I, what value do I bring to this organization?
Well, to have that, I think employers don't realize that, that potluck could make you feel that way. Like, I'm sure that's eye-opening right now to some of our viewers, right? Like, how could a potluck make you question your value, right? Like, I think some employers might actually, watch this and think, wow, I didn't think it could be that impactful if it didn't work out. It could have been very impactful if it was successful, but I don't know if people realize how negatively it impacts if it doesn't. And then if they don't then stand up and say, hey, we didn't realize that this wasn't going to work. We failed. We'll do, this is our plan to do better next time. Because at least if they acknowledge that, I would think that it would have made you feel a little bit better. I don't know if it would have, but
No, but it did change my outlook on the organization, because I did ask the question, what there is no value. That's like somebody saying, hey, I'm going to throw you a birthday party, and nobody shows up.
Yeah. What sounds like something we talked about earlier too is it sounds like, Kitty, that everyone of color were the only ones that actually contributed to the potluck with food. And again, it's very similar to what organizations are doing now, right? And saying, okay, only people of color can help resolve this diversity issue that we're having. So people of color are now placed in positions to, you know, be the resolution, to be the solution to the problem. And
bear the load.
it would have been, 100%. It would have been, I think, to your point, Kitty, I mean, it would have been great if everyone participate, everyone brings in a dish, everyone does those types of things, right? And I think that Casey, you brought up a good point, is that it further isolates. So not only did it fail, but listening to Kitty's reaction, it actually did the exact opposite. So not only did it not fail, but it actually put things in a worse situation than
if you hadn't even done it, it would have been better.
Right.
Yeah.
So
100%. Even had it. Yes, for that. action to
Yeah,
happen. But
absolutely.
how do we bring a solution or a resolution to a problem that we didn't create?
That's right.
So the expectation for me to tell you how to treat me, it's mind-boggling to me, because Black and brown people did not create this situation where we have to have a fix to diversity and inclusion.
That must be a big weight. Like, that I can't even imagine the weight that must feel on you. Like, if you feel like that's what you have to do, that the weight, it must be overwhelming.
It's you are used to carrying it so much that you really don't feel it. And so that's why I so appreciate the podcast that you all have put forth for us to bring awareness to that. Because why do you expect me to fix a problem that I didn't create? Just treat me as you would like to be treated. Give me the same playing time that you have. Give me the same goals that you have. I'm not asking for anything extra, just the level playing field.
And I just want to reemphasize that point, like, because I think, inequity is not a problem of marginalized people for others to empathize with. It is a problem of those who are doing the marginalizing to solve.
Good point.
And
great point.
I think,
Yes.
that's what we have, touched upon in some of the previous discussions. But, Gary, to your point, where the work of building an inclusive workforce is put on Black and brown people, that is doomed to failure because it is not their problem to solve, right? Like, and it is, and too often there is, a separation of diversity, equity, and inclusion from the core of the business. And we talked about this at the conclusion of a previous podcast, where if it was seen as a business imperative, if it was seen as important as launching that new product or putting in that new sales goal, then it would be done.
Yeah,
and it would be done by everyone. And anybody who didn't work towards that goal would not be with the organization.
Right.
So, if we're talking about building diversity, equity, and inclusion into the organization, it is because it has to be a strategic goal that is as important as sales targets, as important as customer delivery and anything else. And if you have this sort of separation of the program and say, here's a day, there's a day, here's an event, there's an event, then I think you're going to see things like the experience that Kitty had with that potluck. And I don't want to belabor the potluck. I do want to sort of move on to greener pastures for a moment, and just talk about what it means to operate within an environment and how it affects your ability to be excited about your work and just do your work if you're not carrying the burden of things like the event that we just talked about.
Well, so what I see right now is I work among a team of transformational leaders. Transformational leadership allows you to bring who you are, bring what you know to the table, lay it out without fear, and work from a place of freedom. Freedom to know that you're valued, so that we're on the same side, working toward the same goal, which is to take care of our client. And so that is what I've experienced, which makes it a joy for me to be with Hudson, is transformational leadership. I have grown. There's no greater feeling when my alarm goes off. I can get up and I don't have a bellyache because I don't know what to expect when I come to my desk. It's a wonderful feeling just to get up and just come on to my desk and make it happen.
No, you're right, Kitty. I mean, you're exactly right. And Casey, to your point, this is how it feels. This is how it felt. when you are in an environment that's successful, there's no degree of paralysis. And what I mean by that is that I've been in environments like yours, Kitty, or your previous environments, let's put it down. There's a degree of paralysis because the one thing that you do is you're always thinking in the back of your mind, how am I being evaluated if I say this? How am I going to be treated, or how am I going to be taken if I react this way? So a part of me is always trying to second guess the culture around me, and it does lead to a degree of paralysis. So sometimes you don't speak, sometimes you wait, sometimes you are pretty scared about and just apprehensive about what it is that you're going to do that's going to set someone off down the wrong tunnel about who you are just because you're Black, right? And that is, I think, the difference. And Kitty, I may be paraphrasing, but that's been my experience. With
Yes.
Hudson, I don't feel that way. I don't feel that there's a sense of paralysis. I can act based on my experience, my knowledge, the support of the team around me, right? The support of just everyone here on this particular call and beyond. And I think that that's the biggest difference, and it really helps with productivity, right? In your company, it really does. It truly does. So anyway, that's my experiences, and what I felt the difference between an environment that is truly inclusive, right? That's truly diverse, that's truly equitable, and an environment that is not.
It's
Right.
not.
So that's been my experience.
Yes, that's the hugest. That's so good, Gary. So
Yeah.
good. That
It's
paralysis.
interesting because you both use the word paralysis, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting that,
Yeah.
that you both have,
Absolutely.
You're frozen
that
in
word is so
place.
powerful.
Yeah, you're frozen in place. So, to speak further to that, you have to carry yourself in a check, because if there's something that's gone wrong, you have to make sure you put it in the way that you're not perceived as the angry Black woman, or you're not perceived as um, too bossy or trying to know too much, or know more than the supervisor, or know more. So your perspective back then is not even considered. Well, here, not only is my perspective considered, my perspective is expected. And
I
that's
like that.
and that's a huge win for me.
That's really powerful, that last line. Thank you for sharing that, Kitty, and thank you for all of the good conversation today. I take from this that you can't expect people to be delivering at their best and to engage in open and heroic and dynamic conversation when there has to be a layer of guard up. And particularly if you're operating within an environment where you suspect that folks have that layer of guard up, that's not going to get solved by a potluck. That's not going to be solved by an email celebrating a particular holiday. It's going to be solved through open and honest dialogue and a real signal of intent to change the dynamics and to create a more inclusive culture. So particularly if your organization has made some mistakes in the past, it's time to own up to them, and to signal a commitment to transformation of the kind that Kitty's been talking about today. So I just want to thank you once again for joining me today in this conversation, Casey, Gary, and Kitty. It has been an absolute delight. Look forward to chatting again soon.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely.
So much. Okay.
Thanks.
To speak with any of today's participants about your Just Start journey, email juststart@hudsonrpo.com.